So when the markets crashed in 2008, I borrowed $300 million.
You borrowed $300 million. Now,
And I bought the best real estate in the world for pennies on a dollar. That's how you get rich. Not by working hard and putting in a stupid 401k full of stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and ETFs. Those are for the peasants.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Angelo Cirinelli, co-founder of Sterling Adams Wealth Management. And from time to time, I get sent financial reels and TikToks from clients asking if what's in the videos are legit. So I thought it'd be interesting to react to some of these videos, as well as a few others I found.
Isn't it convenient that the government says you can't tax unrealized gains on stocks? The wealthy people own the stocks. They haven't sold it yet. How can they pay the taxes? I understand that logic. I'm tracking with that logic. So let's use that same logic. You can't tax unrealized gains on houses.
Well, of course, property
Is it
taxes.
because the middle class owns houses? But hey, at least investment properties are taxed the same way as homes, so the wealthy can still pay their fair share. No, investment properties get to write off depreciation, which means even if the house goes up in value, you can say it got older, so it's not worth as much. They get to write off maintenance, so if a fridge or a garbage disposal goes out, that's a tax write-off. You owning a home, you need to buy a new fridge? That's tough. You better get going. Lowe's is closing soon. Throw that fridge on a credit card. Who cares? Also,
Okay, he's kidding, but don't do that.
Plumber, cleaners, anything like that, that's considered management fees and maintenance fees. That's a tax write-off. Your pipe bursts, you need to hire a plumber? That's coming out of your pocket. Now, a way you can get around this is if you start an LLC, which costs like maybe $300, you can buy a property in it, rent it to yourself, and then throw all this onto that. But that's not really the point. The point is the government hates you because you're not a billionaire.
Okay, that is totally incorrect. You can't just put a property into an LLC and rent it to yourself to try to get tax benefits from it. That's what we in the business call tax fraud. If you tried to do that, you would get audited and you would lose and have to pay a nice penalty on top of all of that. So no, do not do that. I think Arthur's a real estate agent, so he's definitely not a qualified tax professional. If you were to talk to your accountant, they would tell you, do not do this.
I made more money in the crash than I did when it was going up. So the average person, because they don't have financial literacy and they're taught to just work for money, they don't see the other side. They cannot see what they cannot see. So when the markets crashed in 2008, I borrowed $300 million.
you borrowed $300 million. Now,
And I bought the best real estate in the world for pennies on a dollar. That's how you get rich. Not by working hard and putting in a stupid 401k full of stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and ETFs. Those are for the peasants.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. First, the borrowing of the $300 million. As Robert Kiyosaki said, he used that to buy real estate. He didn't use it to go and buy a yacht or a fancy car. Now, there is such a thing as good debt. Usually a mortgage is considered good debt, but it's still possible to go bankrupt on good debt. So that's where you just need to know where your risk tolerance is and how much cash you have on hand to take care of things when things go sideways. Now, onto the 401k part. In general, yes, leveraged real estate or going into business for yourself can generate way better returns than the mutual funds in your 401k. However, real estate and being self-employed are pretty risky in that you need a lot of upfront capital and there's ongoing maintenance that needs to be done in order to keep everything above water. Now, if you're an employee, you are most likely gonna have a match in your 401k where the employer is providing you X% on the dollars you have invested. So usually it's something like the first 3 or 4% you contribute into the 401k, they'll give you a dollar for dollar match. So that's literally free money that you don't want to just leave on the table. Now, if you don't want real estate or a business, then a 401k is really one of the best wealth builders out there. So sure, it's going to take you longer to build up that wealth in a 401k compared to other avenues, but that's really just the trade-off for not taking on the risk of a business or a rental property. And for a deeper dive, I actually have a video on this, so you can check that out here.
You guys want to know why I always talk about infinite banking? Because
whole life commissions are great.
Print money that just keeps getting better with time. I'm going to show you proof by showing you one of my in-force illustrations right now. So check this out. This is a policy on me. I got it when I was 35 years old. This is the 6th year in the policy. I can put in another $32,000 and the cash value is gonna go from 1.12 to 1.215. That's $95,000 for only putting in 32. That means I can borrow against my policy, leverage that $95,000, no taxes involved with that.
And you can do that with a rental or with a brokerage account too.
Think about that. I put in 32,000. It's gonna go up by 95. That's almost 3 times as much of what I put in. Then I can take the 95 and go make more. I'm literally making money in 2 places at the same time. And it just gets
math
better
is
every
a
single year.
little off here. It wasn't
Year
just
10, when I'm just
35,000 that he
45
put
years old,
in.
the most I can put in is about 51 grand. The cash value goes up by almost $120,000. That's a 135% cash on cash return.
Okay, no, that's not how cash on cash returns. That's kind of like saying, hey, I've got $1 million portfolio. I put $1 into it and the portfolio grew by $100,000. Therefore, I earned 100 grand on my $1. No, you earned 100 grand on your $1,001 portfolio.
And use the 120,000 to go make more. By year 20, when I'm only 55 years old, put in another $51,000, the cash value goes up by $222,000. That is a 336% cash on cash return. Before I
That's not cash on cash return. The math is not math in here.
To make even more. It just gets better and better and better. Guaranteed tax-free.
All right, so aside from the blatant math errors on here, it's pretty obvious that Mr. Burr is doing very well for himself. He's got $1 million in cash value in a whole life policy. And based off the $7 million death benefit, I'm going to assume that he's probably by the end of his life going to bump up or even go over the estate tax exemption limits where, and that's 15 million if you're single, 30 million if married. So in that case, getting a whole life policy can make sense to pay for the estate taxes, but it doesn't always make sense all of the time. On top of that, there's no way to get to $1 million in year 6 from only putting in 32 grand a year for the first few years. If I had to guess, he probably funded the policy with about 800,000-ish in that ballpark. And I mean, I don't know about you, but most 35-year-olds don't have 800K just laying around to throw into a whole life policy. For most people, just buying a cheap term insurance policy and investing the difference is going to be a way better return on an investment than sinking all that money into a whole life policy. And a big reason why whole life policies are so prevalent on social media is because the commission for the life insurance agent is really, really good for a whole life policy. So there's a pretty good incentive to push these types of policies.
You're not going to pay your bills on $200 a month net cash flow from a single family home. Perhaps we clear the air on a little something. A cash out refi isn't a profit. It's not cash flow, none of that shit. It's borrowed equity from the future. And while we're here, single family homes do not cash flow well. I don't know how many times I gotta beat a dead horse when I hear a realtor it's like, oh, you stopped selling residential real estate, you bought some houses. Not really, okay? It was kind of like the gateway drug. You know, you buy one, you're like, hey, it's not that bad. I can tell you right now, you're not gonna pay your bills on $200 a month net cash flow from a single family home in Indianapolis, Indiana, or Dayton, Ohio, or whatever bum Egypt market you wanna buy in. You're gonna have to have 1 million of them. Think a little bigger.
Yeah, I mean, he's right. Single family homes aren't really meant to be investment properties. They tend to make more sense as flips rather than buy and holds. And that's for a couple of reasons. So first, you only have one tenant in a single family home. And so if they vacate, then you're covering 100% of the expenses on the property. And for the time and effort that you put into a single family home to just make $200 a month in cash flow, you might as well just buy a multifamily property because it's still gonna take the same amount of time and due diligence. Now, there are cases where if you rent a single family home by the room, that can increase the cash flow and make it worth it. I mean, the trade-off is you really got to keep the peace between the roommates, and you're also going to have more transient tenants. But this can be a good option for if the property's around like a college or in a higher density area. Now, another option that I've seen is when someone is selling off a portfolio of single family homes where you can buy a few of them all in one package deal. But still, for the most part, single family homes don't tend to make the best rentals.
You said a home is a terrible investment.
It is a terrible investment. Doesn't cash flow. You don't get big tax write-offs because of it. You have no leverage. You're living in it. You're paying for it. You never own it. Even when the loan's paid, you don't own it.
Really?
No, you still got to pay property taxes. Still got to insure.
I mean, with a
Still
rental
gotta maintain.
property, you
If
still got to
just
pay
break it
property
down
taxes.
and don't
In fact, the
become
property
emotional,
taxes tend to be
people get
higher on a
emotional about
rental.
their house. This is my house. It ain't your house. You're a partner in this house with the state.
Your recommendation to a normal family would be to rent?
Never buy a house. Rent where you live. Take all your money and invest in properties that cash flow. I'm not saying don't own real estate. I'm saying live in a house and pay rent. Take all the money that you would have spent on that house and invest in real estate that cash flows, that pays you every month. Could be retail, storage, apartment buildings like we invest in. Could be land. If you're a farmer or a rancher and you know how to get cows to cash flow, then do that.
All right, so just with the conflicts of interest here, Grant Cardone, he runs a real estate syndication, and that means that he takes people's money and invests it in real estate. So obviously, if instead of you putting that money into a home for yourself, you take that, invest it with him, he gets a cut of that. But having said that, he does make some good points. So first, if you're buying a single family home and don't have roommates, then your home is really an expense. I mean, you are building up the equity by paying down the principal every month, and homes do tend to appreciate over time, but it's still a monthly expense. And on top of that, the tax benefits of owning a primary residence don't tend to be as good as owning a rental, where you can write off a lot more through depreciation. Now, he did say, however, that you don't get leverage on your primary residence, and that's not true. Like, in fact, you can get in for much lower down payments on a primary residence than you can with a rental. That's as low as you go down 3%, or if you get a VA loan, that's 0% down. So it's way easier to get into a primary residence than a rental. This is all really a case of it depends on the cost of the single family home you're buying and the deals that you can source. If it makes sense to just rent and invest, or to buy a home and then invest. But if you buy a multifamily residence and move into one of the units, then that really changes the math a lot, because now you've cut down on your living expenses because you have a tenant paying down your mortgage, and you're able to get that leveraged growth of owning a property. Now, come to think of it, this is actually a pretty good thing to try and model. Where does it make sense to rent and invest, or buy a home and invest? So, all right, stay tuned. I'm gonna make a video of that.
How to use real estate to avoid W-2 taxes. Most people think rental property losses can offset their W-2 income. They cannot, unless you know this loophole. In 1987, the government created the passive activity loss rules. They separated income into two buckets. Bucket one is non-passive income. That includes your W-2, your 1099, your stocks, and your crypto. Bucket two is passive income. That is rental real estate. The government drew a line between these two buckets. Passive losses cannot cross over to offset non-passive income. That means if you buy a rental property and generate a $200,000 paper loss from depreciation, you cannot use that loss to offset your W-2 income. The loss just sits there.
In most cases, that's right.
There are only three ways to get around the passive activity loss rules. Exception one, you make less than $150,000 in adjusted gross income. Most high earners do not qualify for this. Exception two, you sell the property. When you sell, you can use the accumulated passive losses to offset the capital gains. Exception three, you qualify as a real estate professional. To qualify,
I got a video on this here.
You need to pass two tests. Test one, you spend 750 hours per year in your real property trade or business in which you materially participate. Test 2, you spend more than half your working time in real estate. If you work a 40-hour per week W-2 job, you would need to spend 41 hours per week in real estate. That is nearly impossible for most W-2 earners. But there is another way. Under IRS Code Section 469,
and you also have to materially
short-term
participate
rentals do
in
not
your
count as passive
rentals.
activity. If your average guest stay is 7 days or less, the IRS does not treat it as a rental. It is treated as a trade or business. That changes everything. You do not need 750 hours. You do not need to spend half your time in real estate. You only need to materially participate. There are 7 tests for material participation. The 2 most common for short-term rental investors are: Test 1, you work 500 or more hours per year on your STR business. Test 2, you work 100 or more hours and more than any single other person. That second test is less than 2 hours per week. Guest communication, coordinating cleaners, managing bookings, responding to reviews. If you hit 100 hours and you do more than your cleaner, your handyman, or anyone else, you qualify. Now here is where it gets powerful. When you buy a rental property, the IRS says you must depreciate it over 39 years for short-term rentals. On a $600,000 property, that is about $15,000 per year in depreciation. But a cost segregation study changes that. An engineer comes through your property and identifies all the components.
And that $600K is on the value of the structure, so that wouldn't be including the value of the land.
These items do not last 39 years. They last 5, 7, or 15 years. With 100% bonus depreciation back as of 2025,
the structure
you can write
value
off
there.
all of
Okay,
these
good.
components in year 1. On a $600,000 property, you could identify $150,000 to $200,000 in bonus depreciation immediately. This is the tax code working exactly as written. You just need to know the rules. Your 9 to 5 funds it. Short-term rentals multiply it. This is how the wealthy stay wealthy.
All right, yeah, so this is all correct when it comes to short-term rentals. Now, one thing I just wanted to point out is that where he's talking about the $200,000 deduction from the cost segregation study, that's not like free money. On the back end, if you sell the property, you're gonna have to pay recapture tax on that $200K, and the recapture tax is taxed at your ordinary income tax rate. Now, there are ways to minimize this on the back end by doing another cost segregation study when you sell it, but unfortunately, even if you do a 1031, if you do a accelerated depreciation / cost seg strategy, there's going to be some sort of taxable gain there. All right, if you like this, don't forget to hit the like button. And if there's enough interest, I can do more of these because this is actually pretty fun. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.